Welcome back to the lead. Returning to our world lead, I have a little news whiplash here, and the president's announcement that up to 300 military advisors will be sent to Iraq. The big question: what can these advisors do to cut off what some are calling the beginning of a civil war? Let's bring in retired General Anthony Zinni, former Commander-in-Chief of the United States Central Command. First of all, General Zinni, thanks so much for being here. Can you explain exactly what these 300 military advisors will be actually doing? We're told they'll be broken up into several small teams of about a dozen individuals each. Talk us through where they go, how they assist the Iraqi military.
Well, it depends on which level they're advising. At the more senior levels, at the corps, division, brigade level, they might be advising on more operational level things such as logistics, intelligence, fire support coordination. So it would be the more broader staff functions. And they would also be a conduit for any support that we might have to bring in and coordinate. At the lower levels, if we put them down on the frontline levels, if we're in at the company level, platoon level, where you might see special forces, special operations forces, it might be advice on weapons and tactics. It could be actually helping collect intelligence, reconnaissance, could be to actually control U.S. fires like air support. So depending on the level, obviously you're going to get a different kind of advice that goes up the chain.
Obviously, we're still speaking theoretically here, but how dangerous could this be for those 300 troops?
Well, depending on where you are. I was an advisor in Vietnam, and I was at the company platoon level, and obviously you're in the middle of the firefights, and you were responsible for providing American support and engage in the fight directly. So at that level, where you might find the Special Forces A teams, maybe SEALs and others, you're obviously part of the frontline units in contact. As you move further back, you're more involved with the staff planning, and you're more involved with the staff functions and the higher level commands.
The president was asked about the fear of mission creep by sending these advisors to Iraq, and then all of a sudden you have thousands of ground troops because of decisions. Take a listen.
I think we always have to guard against mission creep. So let me repeat what I've said in the past. American combat troops are not going to be fighting in Iraq again.
Let's explain exactly what that means to people, because there's some selective language being used. American combat troops are not going to be fighting. What does that mean exactly?
I think what is meant by that is conventional forces. You know, we aren't going to see infantry battalions, artillery units, those kinds of units engaged. I think he's accepted the special forces, the advisory effort, those forces that may be involved in protecting our embassy and our personnel or conducting the evacuation. So I think there should be more clarity in that. We've used this term boots on the ground. It's too generic, and I think there ought to be more specificity so people can understand exactly what's meant by that.
Yeah, I think people get confused. I think the American people don't necessarily understand the difference between a combat troop and a special force. They just think American fighting men and women in a country with a gun getting shot at. What's the difference? So I take your point. President Obama also said this about possible future action in Iraq. Take a listen.
We will be prepared to take targeted and precise military action if and when we determine that the situation on the ground requires it. If we do, I will consult closely with Congress and leaders in Iraq and in the region.
What does that mean to you, General Zinni? Specific airstrikes with intelligence gleaned from these 300 special operations troops?
I think in the near term, which obviously the mission is to stop ISIS from moving any further south, particularly, or getting into Baghdad and maybe not taking it, but certainly causing a lot of chaos and violence. I think in the immediate sense, it's to provide air support to frontline units defending Baghdad. But I think the next phase of this is going to have to be a counteroffensive to retake the ground that ISIS has. But there had better be, in my view, some sort of political arrangement where Maliki reaches out to the Sunnis, or else going back up and just conducting a military operation, I don't think it's going to resolve the issues that the Sunnis have. And those non-ISIS forces that are up there that may be supporting them or at least willing to have them in there because it's the devil they know. So I think you have two military parts to this, the immediate emergency defense and then a political requirement to set the stage and the conditions in the Sunni areas and provinces that allow you to conduct a counteroffensive that's acceptable up there that leads toward a greater political solution.
And lastly, General Zinni, what lessons have we learned, especially people like you who helped wage the war in Iraq? What lessons have we learned so that we don't repeat mistakes that we made in Iraq already? What does President Obama need to know, having learned from mistakes made in that 9-year war?
Well, there's a lot of lessons learned. I would say first, understand the complexity of what you're getting into. It wasn't a war just against a dictator and the forces of democracy. It had religious undertones, ethnic undertones that we didn't appreciate going in. Also, the idea that you can shake and bake democracy and hold a few elections and it's going to take and solidify, that doesn't work. And the estimates in the beginning, the understanding of the culture, what we would encounter when we went in, those were the biggest mistakes. We went in with too few troops, threw away the plan we should have used in the beginning. But more importantly than that, Saddam was contained. We had bigger fish to fry and interests elsewhere in the world, like Afghanistan, that obviously suffered from this. And I hope we understand that going forward.
General Anthony Zinni, thank you so much for your thoughts, and thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up, welcome back to The Lead, continuing with our world lead and President Obama's decision to send up to 300 military advisors, he's calling them, to Iraq. While no airstrike appears imminent, President Obama made clear that the U.S. is not taking sides in a possible civil war. And joining me now is Senator Saxby Chambliss of Georgia. He is the ranking Republican on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He also serves on the Armed Services Committee. Senator Chambliss, thanks for being here. These military advisors that President Obama announced, up to 300 of them, will work alongside the Iraqi military. Will that be enough?
Well, I think that's a real question because we don't know the answer to that. Here's what the president didn't say, Jake, and that is he didn't tell us what his goal is and what's his plan to achieve that goal. He did say that he may send in up to 300 Special Forces folks to carry out a joint operation with the Iraqi security forces. And they're going to be there in an advisory capacity only, or are they there to carry out joint operations? I don't know the answer to that. But 300 Americans is not going to solve the problem of stopping the advance of this group that is more extreme than literally core al-Qaeda.
What do you think he should have done then if 300 special operation troops are not enough? Do you think there should be airstrikes? Do you think we should send in ground troops? What would you prescribe?
Well, listen, the president's got good military advisors around him, and they're the ones that actually need to be telling him. But clearly, particularly from an intelligence standpoint, we need to carry out a surge to be able to provide the president with the right kind of intelligence relative to these ISIL folks. We don't know where they all are now. We don't know the exact number of them, but the intelligence community is still gathering that kind of information. Based on that and based on what the president said, I assume he's not going to carry out airstrikes, that they're going to be more targeted types of strikes, which indicates to me that he's probably thinking more about drones than he is about sending F-16s or some tactical aircraft in there.
Senator, as I'm sure you know better than I, the American people are very skeptical of sending any military troops into Iraq. Why do you think there is a national security interest in preventing ISIS or ISIL from taking Baghdad, in stopping what looks to be something like a civil war in Iraq?
Well, clearly, Americans have paid a heavy price in Iraq. We made a lot of gains and provided a lot of subsistence to the Iraqi people so that they could govern themselves. All of that seems to be falling apart now. All of the gains that we made, all of the sacrifices that America and Americans made seems to be for naught. I think it's important that we ensure that American lives were not lost for nothing. But secondly, our economy is still oil-driven. And it's important that in that part of the world, not just in Iraq, but in that part of the world, that we have as much stability as possible. We've already seen the ISIL folks make an attempt to overrun the largest oil refinery in Iraq. There's a question as to whether they've been successful at that or not. But if that does happen, then you're going to see the price of gas in America increase more than it should. So there are a number of national security interests that America has in the whole region. Iraq happens to be the country now that's at the center of that stability issue in the region.
Senator, I just want to press you on the point you made when you said that one of the reasons why we should be sending troops and having more U.S. military activity in Iraq is because we are so dependent upon oil and we need stable and hopefully lower oil prices. That's an observation that I think might ring upsetting with a lot of Americans, the idea that we would go to war for cheaper gasoline.
And we should not go to war for cheaper gasoline, but our economy is driven by that, and that's why providing stability in that part of the world is important to us. We never went into Iraq on the very first day with the idea that oil was an issue, but stability in the region is important.
You're on the Senate Intelligence Committee. How much of a threat do the terrorists with ISIS or ISIL pose not just to American interests and not just to American allies, but to the United States homeland itself? How concerned is the intelligence community that these terrorists are capable of striking in the United States?
We know that in Syria, for example, an American strapped a suicide vest on himself and went in and blew himself up and killed a number of other people. My biggest fear, and the thing that keeps me awake at night, is that we're going to have more homegrown terrorists do that same thing in the United States. We don't need these individuals to have the opportunity to train as to how to do that in places like Iraq and Syria.
Senator Saxby Chambliss, thank you so much.
Sure. Good to be with you, Jake.